You know, I've always wondered what my MCU films would look like with a bunch of excessive gore and violence and just unrelenting amounts of profanity. And I gotta tell you, now that I've seen it, I like it. What is up, everybody, and welcome to my review of Deadpool and Wolverine. For many people, the biggest movie of 2024. Now, I have been a massive fan of Deadpool, as well as an even bigger fan, even more massive of a fan of Hugh Jackman's take on Wolverine. So I have been very excited about this movie. You know, there was a long stretch where I was a little mixed on bringing back Hugh Jackman, because I am one of those people that thinks that Logan is, if there's ever a perfect end to a character's legacy, that was it. And I was concerned about, is this movie going to fuck with that legacy at all? Even if I like it, is it going to taint that in any bit? It doesn't, and I'll get more into that later. But after I got over that initial reservation when they announced this movie a couple years ago, I just started to get really excited about the prospects of seeing that take on Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Seeing him full-blown rated R, irreverent humor, interacting with Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool. And then, of course, we got all the speculation and, you know, the leaks and rumors of the multitudes of cameos that were going to be in this film. And then all those expectations start to bubble and boil and build up. And I knew whether or not this movie actually met those expectations or not, inevitably, it's going to be a memorable couple hours in the theaters. So now we've got it. I managed to walk in without being spoiled by any of these dickheads on the internet. I have experienced Deadpool and Wolverine. Is it the movie that is going to save the MCU? Is it a worthy return of Deadpool? Is it something that merits bringing Hugh Jackman's Wolverine back from the dead? Let's talk about it. And I'll just cut right to the chase. I had an absolute blast with this movie. It is the most fun that I have had in the theater all year round. It is probably more fun than I even had in the theater last year. And for them to have the concept and the title and the promise of Deadpool and Wolverine, and mashing those two characters' dynamics together, I think they did just about everything that they could with that concept in this movie. They squeezed every last bit of juice that there was to get out of that, and I loved every single thing that they did. First of all, I was so pleasantly surprised that this is easily the most out there and the most adult and hard R Deadpool movie yet. That was a big concern for me, and that was a concern for all of us whenever we knew that Disney had bought Fox, and Deadpool was now a character that could be in the MCU and would most likely eventually be in the MCU. And all of us that loved the first two films and loved this character were going, what is that going to look like? Are you going to bleep him out? Are you going to nerf the character? Is he going to be more kid-friendly now? Like, what does that even mean? And I am happy to report that no, Disney did not water him down whatsoever. Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool is just as insane as he has ever been.
Want to do some cocaine?
Hey, cocaine is the one thing that Feige said is off limits.
And there was something so refreshing about that, because you still get kind of the MCU vibe, you still get some of the MCU humor in here, but it's so much more charged with the adult angle, so much more charged with the rated R quality and with the comedic timing of both Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman delivering these lines. And so this is probably the most and the heaviest that I have laughed at a film in quite a few years. And you guys hear me bitch all the time about how comedies are dead. And while it still pains me that we don't just get straight comedies nowadays that are gold, for a movie that has a lot of humor in it, the jokes that hit really hit. And something that I felt definitely got to step up in this movie is Shawn Levy's direction of these action sequences is fucking awesome. And we get a ton of action in here. The movie opens up with one of the greatest intros that I've seen to a movie in a very long time. And, you know, it's leaked all over the internet, so a lot of you probably seen it even if you haven't seen the movie. But the music that they choose for it, as well as the mix of the action and Ryan Reynolds dancing, I mean, that right there set the tone of the movie and was just a really good, fun action sequence in between all of the comedy that was going on. You get multiple fights between Deadpool and Wolverine. You have multiple times where Deadpool and Wolverine team up to fight other people. Of course, you have other characters who I'm not going to name that come in that have big fight sequences. And all of the action was just very, very satisfying. For a movie that didn't really need to shoot for the stars for the action, because we're here for the comedy and the character moments and the goofiness, they definitely took that step forward and said, no, we're still going to entertain the shit out of you when there's not jokes on screen. And a lot of that is because of the talent and the very clear chemistry between Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. I mean, just the behind the scenes, real life chemistry between those two people is why this movie exists in the first place. I don't know if there's many or any Deadpool and Wolverine mashups in the comic books, and certainly the Deadpool movies, aside from openly joking about the X-Men characters, didn't necessarily head in a direction where that was obviously going to be the next path that we're going to take with Deadpool. But because Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds just have such a good back and forth humor with each other and a bit of a joking rivalry to a certain degree, everybody wanted this to happen. The fans wanted this to happen so much that they were able to drag Hugh Jackman out of retirement and said, all right, man, I know Wolverine's dead. I know you have hung up the claws and Logan was a phenomenal ending for your character, but there's one thing that you didn't get to do as Wolverine, and that's fuck around with me for 2 hours. Feel game? And so their antagonism towards each other, their eventual friendship, the back and forth while they're fighting, the back and forth while they're fighting other people, the jokes about each other's flaws. There's just so much good comedic value out of just the chemistry of those two actors that you could have given them a shit script, and I think they still could have probably delivered a pretty entertaining movie, because they're just lightning with each other.
Want to talk about what's haunting you, or should we wait for a third act flashback? Go fuck yourself.
I also was very happy, not only because I didn't have any of it spoiled for me, but I was happy that the cameo side of this movie was very satisfying, very entertaining, and all of it had a purpose, and that is the clincher right there. We're in this era of comic book films, mostly in the MCU, where me and a few other people have not so lovingly started to dub it cameo porn, where people are more concerned about who's going to possibly show up for a few seconds in this movie than they are what the actual movie is, or what the story is, or what anything else that's actually more important to the quality of the film experience is. It's just, let's speculate who's going to show up. And while that's always fun, I mean, moments like that get a big rise out of the people in the theater for a reason. They're exciting when they're done right. But what this movie did, aside from definitely picking some good people to show up to get that excitement and utilizing them in a very fun and exciting way, but it made it matter to the story. And it made it matter beyond just a look who it is moment. Everybody that shows up in this movie, there's a purpose that they serve to propel the story forward. And that is something that you definitely don't want to lose sight of if you're going to have a movie that's going to have all this crazy multiverse hijinks. There has to be a purpose. And don't get me wrong, some of the cameos, they've already told us in the trailers, or they released it in a press statement months ago. About a third of them to half of them you're going to see coming. But there's a few of them that were nice little fun surprises, and there was one of them. There was one of them that got me to stand up and start fucking doing this, because, oh, it was so good to see that guy. So fucking good. And the other part that really ties in with all of the cameos that I really appreciated about this movie is that, very similar to how No Way Home was kind of like this this process that us fans got to go through to have an appropriate ending and an appropriate goodbye, a more appropriate goodbye than we were given to the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. This movie functions as that for the Fox universe and some Marvel characters from the past, where they were, either not successful, or they were replaced by the MCU, or, they're decades old and their movies just stopped coming out because they weren't making money, or, behind the scenes issues, whatever it may be. And throughout the varying quality of those movies that these characters that show up are from, every one of them that you get to see is exciting in some way, because and by the end of the film is definitely confirmed that this is a very satisfying epilogue, a satisfying goodbye that we have as fans for these characters that we otherwise would have never got. So saying goodbye to some of those characters, getting a nice little one extra moment with them, and a little bit of an epilogue, as well as just a really fun, self-aware goodbye to the Fox era of X-Men and Marvel movies. it was satisfying for me. You know, it was really something that I didn't expect to have kind of an emotional reaction to, but I did. And one more thing that surprised me and I really appreciated and enjoyed about this film was Marvel's ability to poke fun at themselves and Marvel's ability to basically roast themselves. I mean, this movie is a lot of things. I mean, it's a Deadpool sequel. It's a resurrection of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. It's a goodbye to the Fox universe. It's a multiverse, playground type movie. It's an introduction of maybe some things that are going to happen, that it's going to change the direction of the MCU. But one thing that it does that I did not expect it to do was acknowledge a lot of people's issues with this current era of MCU that we're in. And there are many jokes, many statements, many winks at the audience that Deadpool especially makes that feels so refreshing. It makes you feel heard. You know, as much as Disney a lot of times feels like they like to audience blame and don't like to listen to fans, this is one of those times where they very much have heard the concerns and heard the criticism and they said, yep, you know what? Valid. We're going to take our L and we're going to make fun of ourselves for 2 hours. So strap in because it's going to be fun. And so ultimately by the end of the movie, it did leave me with a bit of rejuvenated hope for the future of this franchise, because I have been very vocal as somebody that loved the MCU, saw every single movie day one, enjoyed the vast majority of them, you know, until Eternals, I never gave a negative review to any of those films. And I have very much been fatigued with this franchise and with the declining quality of it. And by the end of it, while Deadpool and Wolverine is not a movie that necessarily gives you a hint of where the story or where the overall direction of this universe is going to go, you know, it's not planting any seeds for us to follow to the next Avengers film or anything like that. What it did do to renew my hope is that it told me that they listened and that they know what the issues have been and what they need to do to hopefully course correct that. And also the fact that this movie is so rated R and so breaking the fourth wall and mingles in the MCU without really having any overall effect on the greater MCU. It doesn't have any implications that I expect to affect the next Thor movie or Shang-Chi 2 or anything like that. It tells me that in the future, we're hopefully going to get more things like this. When they eventually figure out how to do Blade, we're going to probably get a rated R Blade, which, thank God. We might get some offshoots here and there and do a rated R storyline with these characters, which would be nice and refreshing. We might get movies like this here and there that are more of a standalone story, that we're just going to have fun and play in this universe a bit without having 5 movies previous to us set the breadcrumbs to this story and then set up 5 other things, where it started to get exhausting after a while as an MCU fan, feeling like I had to watch everything or I was left out. And this movie gives me hope that we're going to have less of that in the future and just focus more on telling good individual stories and good individual movies, which we need. The greater universe stuff is great. They did it better than anybody ever had and maybe better than anybody ever will for like a solid decade. And then after Endgame, they really started to struggle with that. And I think a movie like this and the success that it's inevitably going to have is going to tell them, okay, we now have earned the freedom to not feel shackled to do that every single time, and I am ready for that. Moving on to the mixed, this movie doesn't necessarily have a story that is worth writing home about. I don't think it's a bad story. I've seen a lot of early reactions like really go hard on saying it's a terrible story, and my first reaction to that is, what Deadpool movie has had a great story? That's not really the point here, but I genuinely don't think that the story, the time travel narrative and everything they're going with here to make this multiverse and everything happen is a bad story. It's a decent little setup to get everything in motion. The value of this movie is seeing the character interactions and the action sequences and the banter back and forth between Deadpool and Wolverine and a lot of the surprises that it has in store for you. Nobody who's watching this is really invested on, is Deadpool actually going to repair the timeline or not? Nobody gives a fuck. So I think that was a very self-aware decision of, let's get something that makes sense to get all of these things in place, and let's focus on the entertainment value of what we're trying to bring with the experience that is Deadpool and Wolverine. For me, it worked. But I'm not going to argue with anybody that says that the story was a low point, because of course it is. You know, I'm usually a story and characters guy first, so I would usually be the first person to call that out, but that's not the experience that I necessarily go to Deadpool for. So that's going to be something that divides a lot of people. Moving on to the negatives, and I only have two, and one is in regard to the humor. Now, while the jokes that hit really big, and I think that the majority of the jokes hit big, this is a movie where the pacing and the cadence of the humor is so rapid fire that it's literally like a mile a minute from the time the movie starts to the time that the credits roll. And so just the simple law of averages is at play here. When you go for so many jokes, inevitably some are going to hit better than others. And so you're just creating kind of a weaker average overall of your movie if you try to put quantity of jokes over quality of jokes to a degree. There's also something to be said about just kind of getting a little exhausted, a little fatigued with the pacing of humor. For as much as I want to laugh at a Deadpool film, and I did laugh at a Deadpool film, I would say half to 2/3 of the way through the film, I did find myself getting a little bit fatigued with the pacing of the humor. And so I found myself much more engaged and laughing harder at the earlier humor in the film than I did with the stuff in the later sections. And the only other negative that I have is something that is kind of just me assuming what is going to happen in the future. So this is a movie that is definitely a novelty style film. You know, this is something that is a team up movie. It's something that's going for a lot of excitement with cameos and multiverse madness and universe playground aesthetic. And so while I had an absolute blast with it, and I really want to see it again in theaters, and there's not many movies nowadays that I say that for, I don't know what my lasting impression is going to be on this movie. Because it is such a experience geared towards giving you the maximum amount of fun and entertainment with your first viewing experience and all the surprises, I don't know how that's going to translate a year from now, 6 months from now, on my third, fourth watch. I still love the first Deadpool, and I feel like when all is said and done, I'm probably still going to prefer the first Deadpool because it's not as much of a novelty approach as this film. And I kind of had the same response to things like No Way Home and Avengers Endgame, where it's just like, man, I can remember that theater experience. But they're not movies that I reach for to watch at home a whole lot. So this is one of those movies that's definitely going for that sporting event type experience where you're going to remember your first time watching it. You're going to hope to see it in a very lively, fun crowd. You're going to want to bring your best friend or your family members to experience this with, but it's probably not going to be something that you're going to replay as often as movies that are more story-driven. But overall, guys, I had an absolute blast with this one. It delivered pretty much everything that I wanted, and certainly a lot of things that I didn't even know that was going to be coming with this experience. And so from somebody who loves Deadpool and loves the character of Wolverine, I'm very happy with what they got. I'm in a place where I'm more hopeful for the future of the MCU, and I can't wait to go back and check this thing out again. So I can't see too many Deadpool fans being upset with this because it delivers kind of the quintessential Deadpool crazy experience that you want. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all my 2024 new release movie reviews. I'm also going to put my most recent X-Men ranking up here from back when Dark Phoenix came out. I'm not sure if I'll update that this weekend with Deadpool and Wolverine or not, so stay tuned. But please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future that I do with this franchise or with the MCU. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.